So recently, I've been getting kind of interested in low-angle jack planes, and I thought, well, maybe I could just build one. So I did, and it came out pretty decent. It looks good, and it does the things that a low-angle jack is supposed to do. And in the build video, I said to my audience, hey, would you guys like to see me buy one of the commercial versions of this plane and compare the two of them, head to head? And the audience response was unanimous. They all said, Rex, it's your money, so absolutely, we'd love to see that. Go ahead and buy one. So I did. Here's the Stanley low-angle jack plane. And I want to compare the two of them together, because is it possible that mine is just as good as the commercial version? Could it be that my cheap homemade plane is even better than the factory-made one? Of course not. Don't be silly. Everything my plane does, the Stanley does better. My homemade plane can joint an edge with surgical precision, and it's really good on the shooting board, probably better than any of my other planes. But as a surfacing plane, my homemade low-angle jack is only okay. The long sole makes it tough to get into the little dips and hollows in wood, and the low angle does give me some tear out. The Stanley joints an edge at least as well as my plane does, but its machined sole and greater weight make it much more steady and precise on the work. That weight carries over to the shooting board, where this thing will take off thick slices of end grain. It's really very good. Honestly, it's better than good. This thing devours end grain. It's even better than the custom-built infill smoother that I made last year, and it burns me to admit that. As a general stock prep plane, the Stanley is still kind of only okay. That long sole still works against you, and the low angle of the iron still results in more tear out than I'd like to see. Comparison over. This Stanley beat my homemade plane in every conceivable category. But that's no reason we should stop talking about it, because I know a lot of my viewers are thinking about picking one of these planes up. And if you're going to splash out over $100 on one of these, you need a really clear idea of what it can and can't do. So far, I've figured out this plane makes a solid jointer and a way above average shooting plane. But for surfacing, I find it a little bit lacking. In general, this plane tears out a lot more than I would like. That kind of stands to reason. If you've got a very low-angle blade like this, and it's meeting grain that rises up even a little bit towards you, that low angle is just going to get right underneath that grain, tear it up, and ruin the surface of your wood. And that does seem to happen an awful lot with this plane. Now, that tear-out effect is reduced somewhat by the adjustable mouth. The mouth on this thing can be adjusted until it is microscopically small. And when you get it really tiny like that, it does help with tear-out, but it's not a cure-all. And in general, I still find that my plain old, regular 45-degree vintage Stanley planes give me a better surface with less futzing around. But there's another wrinkle to this. A lot of people purchase a low-angle plane like this in order to do high-angle smoothing. I know, that was really weird. I'll let it sink in for a second, because I didn't understand it at first either. Here's the thing. When you have a bevel up plane, your planing angle is 100% determined by your bevel. So, if you want a different planing angle, all you have to do is change the bevel. A lot of people either have a second bevel, or they just take the iron that comes with the plane and grind it to 50 degrees. When you put that 50-degree iron on top of the 12-degree bed, you've got a 62-degree planing angle. That's a really high pitch, and it should do a lot to reduce tear out. So, in order to do a fair comparison, I'm going to set up my grinder to grind at 50 degrees, put a new bevel on this iron, not even on the whole thing, I'll probably just do the leading edge, re-hone it on the stones, reinstall it, set the plane up, and then run the plane through its paces, surfacing a variety of different woods. I'll try polite and even-tempered North American hardwoods, and even some exotics if I can find a few scraps sitting around. And then we'll see if this higher pitch really does anything. So, I'm pretty much sold on this 50-degree bevel angle. This higher angle setup of the plane smooths wood with pretty much zero tear out, and it's not much harder to push. Does that mean that this plane will sort of do everything? Not at all. See, a lot of people call this tool the Swiss Army knife of planes. And that might be true, but it's not a compliment. Have you ever tried to use the pliers on a Swiss Army knife? They suck. In the same way, this plane's really good for some things, but it's not going to work well for other tasks, Like for instance, this long sole, which lets it work well as a jointer and well as a jack plane, this is going to make it work really poorly as a smoothing plane. One of the main functions of a smoother is that it's small, and it can get into little dips and hollows in the wood to help you get that final surface. This big long sole on here is going to mean it always rides over those low spots, and you're pretty much never going to be able to smooth them out. So this plane is not going to replace a good smoothing plane. I also think this thing is probably going to be pretty mediocre as a rough stock removal plane, like a 4-plane or a scrub plane. Now I know, you can buy yet another iron for this thing, grind it with a very aggressive camber, even more aggressive than for a normal pitch plane, install it in here, open the mouth up wide, and then you're set up in heavy stock removal mode. I get that, and I believe that it works. But for the same amount of money and effort, you can buy a super cheap plane, like this Great Neck over here, grind the iron to a camber, sharpen it, set it probably only one time, and then you've got a dedicated heavy stock removal plane. When you need to take off a lot of material, instead of disassembling and reassembling and resetting up your plane, you just grab this thing and go to town. So I've said some good things about the plane, and I've said some negative things about it. Can we actually find a place for this thing in our toolkit? Maybe. Let's take a look at an actual woodworking toolkit and see where the low-angle jack might fit in. When I'm doing work for my own house or commission work, I focus on these 3 planes. I've got a smoothing plane, obviously, a 4-plane, which is just like a scrub. It does heavy stock removal, but this one's made of wood, and it's light. And I also use a jointer plane for truing up big, wide surfaces and for jointing edges for putting boards together. These 3 planes will handle most of the things that you need in your woodworking life. But I find there are a few gaps, so I add a couple other planes in. For instance, you could shoot with any of these planes, but none of them is really good on end grain. So I also add in a number 4.5. This is a larger, heavier smoothing plane, and that extra weight is very helpful on the shooting board. It helps it power through that tough end grain. And then I love my jointer. It works great, but it's also enormous, and I do a lot of small and medium-sized work. There are a lot of times when trying to balance this plane on a 14-inch plank is frankly stupid. So in addition to my jointer, I also have a plain old number 5 Stanley jack plane, and I have this set up the same as a jointer. Medium cut, mostly straight iron with a light camber. It does the exact same job as a jointer plane, but it's smaller, so it's easier to balance on small and medium-sized pieces. Now these 5 planes will handle really anything I do in my day-to-day woodwork. I own an embarrassing number of planes, but I rarely touch anything besides these 5 when I'm actually making furniture pieces. So let's say I was going to pick up the low-angle jack plane. Where would it fit in, and what planes could be replaced? Well, right off the bat, I could get rid of this 4.5 because I almost only use it for shooting. And there's no question that the bevel up jack plane is a superior shooter. It's way better than anything I currently own. I also might get rid of one of these 2 planes. For instance, if you have some machines and that's the way you prep your stock, you probably don't need a long jointer, although you still might get some use out of one. You also might find that you don't need a jack plane like this, that you use a jack sort of infrequently, and that one that's a little bit finer will work just as well as this slightly coarser tool. So you probably can get rid of one of these planes. Maybe you can even get rid of both of them and replace them both with your low-angle jack. Now, you might not be able to find a wooden 4-plane like the one I have here, but it's really easy to grab a brand new, inexpensive plane and set it up as a scrub that'll do the same work. Now, we have 3 planes, and these 3 together are a really reasonable woodworking kit. You need to own a smoother, because your bevel-up jack will not replace that. You need a scrub plane or something similar, because even though you can do heavy stock removal with this, it sounds like too much of a pain. A dedicated plane is going to be faster and more efficient. And then the bevel up jack, well, let's look at it kind of like a specialty plane that fills in the gaps. It's excellent for shooting, it's good for jointing edges, and it's acceptable for leveling faces, finishing up tabletops, stuff like that. You really could get pretty much everything done with just these 3 planes. So, at the end of the day, am I actually recommending the Stanley low-angle jack plane? Yeah, I am. I think that you get an awful lot in this one package. It's not the one plane to rule them all, like a lot of people say it is. There's nothing this plane does that you can't do with another plane. But there are a few things that this plane does better, like shooting. This is a really unbeatable shooting plane. And I think what Stanley's done here is offer a lot of value. $100, $100 plus, that's a lot of money for one hand plane. But you're getting a lot for your money. This plane is thoughtfully designed, well engineered, and really well manufactured. If mine is any indication, then the quality control on these is excellent. I didn't have to do anything to it. I honed the blade and started using it right away. Now, it's not perfect. The adjustment mechanism has a lot of slop in it, and I don't love it. And the plane overall is heavier and maybe a little bit clunkier than it needs to be. I would prefer a lighter and more ergonomic tool. But that's a personal preference thing. I think most people will find this plane to be an excellent value and a good addition to their toolkit. In fact, using this tool has gotten me so interested in low-angle planes that I've decided to test out a few more. I've got some exciting news on that. One of my patrons very thoughtfully just purchased the Veritas bevel-up jack plane, and in an incredible move of generosity, he had it shipped to me before it goes to him. So I have this super high quality, very expensive premium plane to compare head to head with the Stanley. I'm going to do that. And I'm going to go one better. I found another plane that you probably haven't heard of that's in the same price range as the Stanley. And I've purchased that as well. It's going to be here in a couple of days, and I'm going to have 3 bevel-up, low-angle jack planes to compare to figure out which one's the best and which one is the best value. You're not going to want to miss that video, so click on the whatever stuff you need to click on so you hear about it. And while I'm talking about my patrons, I always have to thank them. These videos would be impossible to make without their support, and it goes way beyond monetary support. My patrons do incredible things for me, like lend me ultra-expensive premium planes that I would never buy for myself. My patrons are making things possible that would never happen otherwise, and you can be a part of that community. If you're interested, go on over to patreon.com/RexKruger and check out the early access and rewards that I have just for my patrons. And for everybody who's watching, I'll see you back here next week. Thanks so much for watching.